Every major protagonist in Grand Theft Auto 4 has some type of deep-rooted betrayal to recover from. For Nico, it's Dimitri revealing how he tricked him into killing off Mikhail Faustin, giving him the opportunity to seize control over his friend's empire while simultaneously handing Nico over to Ray Bulgarin. For Luis, I'd say it's Bulgarin's very terrifying betrayal, sending him to walk directly into a setup after showing him the decapitated head of the cook Bulgarin believed Luis worked with to steal diamonds from him. It's a much more complicated, nuanced betrayal that's deeply tied to the overall events of Grand Theft Auto's story, intelligently connecting all three storylines. But what is more emotionally loaded and personally tied is Billy Gray's betrayal towards Johnny. Now we'll dive more into Billy Gray as a character at a later date. Today what we're instead going to be doing is focusing on the betrayal of Billy itself, diving deeper into his and Johnny's background to help better understand the true depth of this betrayal that, despite it calling for retaliation in the sense of the Lost Brotherhood and even perhaps in the sense of Johnny's own level of respect, it's a much harder decision to commit to no matter how justified it may seem to be. Because Johnny isn't just killing a former president turned snitch, or getting rid of some loose end that needed to be dealt with for the sake of Johnny and the remaining Lost members' sake. It was at its core Johnny having to kill one of his oldest friends, possibly even the person he idolized for his entire life.
Peace and prosperity be damned, my brother. You are my brother, Johnny. Always.
According to an email from Michael Klebitz, Johnny's older brother, he was the one responsible for introducing Johnny to Billy. The two first met when Billy was 13 and Johnny was only 10 years old. Michael would later claim Billy was a jackass thinking he was Jesus on an acid trip. From this, we can piece together a clearer sense of the trio's overall relationship. Michael acted as a link between them while Billy, already experimenting with drugs, had developed a kind of inflated ego, with Michael's description going on to describe Billy as a guy who wouldn't piss on you even if you were on fire. He seemed to recognize the inflated ego that drove Billy even as a child, while Johnny, on the other hand, came to only admire him, much to his older brother's dissatisfaction. While we don't know when exactly Michael left the picture, his departure to serve in the US military meant his absence left Johnny completely under Billy's influence with no protection whatsoever. It also marked a turning point that separated him from the other two. His new path as an upstanding citizen, proudly serving his country, clashed sharply with Billy and Johnny's eventual criminal lifestyle. That stark contrast would serve as Michael's anger and sadness over how close, as time went on, Johnny had grown to Billy, a person he knew cared little for anyone other than himself. Even before Michael's enlistment, though, he did witness Billy's natural progression from drugs to violence. According to Billy's criminal record, at just 15 years old, he was arrested for hijacking. Coincidentally, in 1991, at the age of 17, Johnny faced his first criminal charge for the very same crime, further driving home the depth of Billy's influence over him. Interestingly, though, Billy's clash with the law taper off by the late 1980s, entering a relatively quiet period while Johnny's name begins appearing more frequently in police reports throughout the 1990s. During this lull for Billy, it's very likely he wasn't going straight at all, but instead shifting his priorities, moving from random chaos and street-level trouble into something much more structured, where his instinct for self-preservation, his inflated ego, and his taste for violence could actually earn him status. This is probably the period where he first crossed paths with the Lost MC, a world where a ruthless, self-serving guy with a drug problem could find a position of power, so long as he brought fear, money, and notoriety with him. From there, it becomes easy to imagine Billy not just joining the club, but quickly figuring out that bringing in someone like Johnny, impressionable, loyal, and already used to following his lead, would strengthen his own position within the Lost. And the reason I come to that conclusion is because Billy once claimed Johnny was only ever brought into the Lost MC because of him. It's plausible that as Billy embedded himself deeper into the gang, he opened the door for Johnny to follow. And if we zoom out just a little bit, by then many of the early Lost members had criminal records centered on Grand Theft Auto and hijacking. Billy and Johnny would have fit the perfect recruiting process. Apart from the pair, Brian, Jim, and Terry all shared similar charges, which tracks with the gang's foundations and its parallels to real-world biker groups such as the Mongols, whose origins grew out of Vietnam War veterans much like the Lost themselves. In fact, the name of the Lost comes in honor and remembrance of the brothers they lost back in Vietnam. But over time, as older presidents were killed off, locked up, or burned out, Billy's reputation for brutality, his willingness to escalate conflicts, and his charisma among certain members could have served him to climb the ladder, eventually taking the presidency of the Alderney chapter. Now, we yet again meet a little bit of a roadblock here, as there's no official date as to when Billy first reached the status of chapter president. What we do know is that by the mid-1990s, both his and Johnny's lives were already deeply entangled with the Lost MC, even if the exact titles and timelines are vague. Johnny was arrested in the mid-90s on a manslaughter charge and sent to prison, with a later parole violation recorded in 2000, meaning there was a significant stretch of time where he was physically removed from day-to-day club life. Those missing years are important because they leave Billy operating without Johnny at his side, free to navigate club politics, build alliances, or continue to push the envelope against the Angels of Death. And speaking of which, that's another important element to highlight. The Lost and the Angels of Death had been entangled in a bitter war since 1986. A feud so severe was noted on Billy's record that he was the leader of the chapter when some of the gang's worst confrontations took place. This implies that the violent stance he takes in the Lost and Damned DLC is exactly what worries guys like Johnny and Jim, who understood the delicate situation the club was in. They know the Lost aren't in a position to be ready for war or to continue down a war path at that point in time. Financially, legally, or in terms of manpower, it's not the right call. However, Billy is still rooted in the past, and in the war with the Angels in the late 80s and early 90s, he was likely given the perfect backdrop to rise quickly through the ranks and take charge right as hostilities and open gang warfare peaked. So while Johnny was dealing with his own problems with the law in the 90s, it stands to reason that Billy only doubled down on his personal hatred towards the deadbeats, clinging to this belief that earning money and cracking heads weren't mutually exclusive, but that the only way to dominate the opposition was through sheer force. Money was the backseat. Beer, booze, and brothers was all that you needed. As the world ushered in a new millennium at the start of the 2000s, this appears to be the point where the Lost hierarchy as we know it hardened into place. Billy sat at the top as president, with his childhood admirer turned advisor, Johnny, serving as vice president. Jim Fitzgerald took the role of chapter treasurer and acted as a close advisor to Johnny, while Brian Jeremy served as the club's secretary, Terry Thorpe as sergeant-at-arms, and Clay Simmons as road captain. While nothing especially noteworthy happening until 2008, the next major turning point comes right before Billy is arrested on drug distribution charges and sent to court-ordered rehab for a number of months, forcing Johnny to step in as acting president. Before that, Billy would make two horrible mistakes that would deeply affect both the internal and external politics of his own chapter, as he was being completely removed from the situation. While riding late one night with the chapter's mechanic, Angus Martin, the pair was struck by a semi-truck Billy didn't see. Both men would end up surviving, but Angus was left permanently handicapped from the waist down, bounding him to a wheelchair in order to get around, ending his motorcycle riding days. Although he remained loyal to the chapter, the incident would leave Angus with a personal hatred towards Billy. Later, yet another incident involving Billy resulted in another serious crash, this time dragging the Angels of Death directly into the fallout. The details are still a little murky, but the gist is that Billy's accident put the nephew of a prominent Angel of Death member into a coma. An event that couldn't have happened at a worst possible time, as legal trouble was beginning to clamp down on Billy, taking him out of any position to rectify the situation or lead his chapter back into all-out war. So Johnny made a different choice. Instead of escalating, he moved to establish a desperately needed truce with the Angels, handing over Billy's bike for some cash, both to help cover Billy's legal fees and to protect the chapter from more bloodshed while they were effectively leaderless. They were undoubtedly in a very vulnerable position, and all things considered, Johnny handled it surprisingly well. He managed to transition the chapter from constantly bringing heat onto itself to putting business first, finding a way to coexist with the Angels and lay low. It was a very smart move, especially with the police still actively keeping a very close eye on the Lost and its members. And this brings us right up to the events of the Lost and Damned DLC.
We are brothers for life, lost forever. In these perilous times, it's more important than ever that you follow your leader, and that is me. Remember. Yeah.
Even without knowing Billy's full past, the depth of his hatred for the Angels, or how bad his drug problem really is, it isn't hard to read between the lines just by playing through the DLC. It's just as easy to pick up on the contrasting leadership styles between Johnny and Billy. Johnny is still focused on business and keeping everyone out of trouble, while Billy is intent on reclaiming the top spot and running the chapter exactly how he wants. In other words, He wants to return to an all-out war with the Angels and to undo everything Johnny put into place during the months Billy was in rehab. Despite that being the most stable and productive period their chapter had seen in quite a long time. Had Billy been calmer and in a more rational frame of mind, it would have made far more sense to continue laying low. He could have gathered information from Johnny and the rest of the Lost about the current situation, since he's been out of the loop for so long, and then acted accordingly, using the truce with the Angels to recruit, grow, and maybe even slowly transition leadership, or aggressively undo the truce he was so passionately against. And then when the time was right, moved to retake his bike aggressively when the Angels least expected it. Hell, the guy holding Billy's bike thought he was dead. If the Lost had kept their heads down just a little longer, the revelation that Billy was alive and back in charge could have landed a far more shocking and really terrifying realization to his enemies. The leader of the Lost that can't be reasoned with, that has a tendency for violence and pushing everything further without giving a damn, is now back in charge. And they gave him time to build in his favor. But instead, Billy does the complete opposite. Just as he shocked his chapter with the tragedy of Angus before leaving, he did the same by initially focusing on Johnny.
So, Johnny boy, where's my bike?
You know where it is.
Let me rephrase the question. Where the fuck is my bike and where the fuck haven't you got it back for me?
Because you know where it is.
Are you deaf? Give me that whiskey. Are you fucking deaf?
No!
Then answer the goddamn question. Why the fuck haven't you got it back for me, friend, brother?
I've always said this demand about where his bike is was Billy's way of humbling Johnny. The chapter is his now, and the VP does what he's told. As he puts it, they needed some balls. It's the start of a pattern that runs through their conversation on the way to get Billy's bike, and then almost every single cutscene between them afterwards. Billy hates Johnny's leadership style, and he likely hated that Johnny had built up enough influence within the chapter to realistically threaten his position at the top. Now, that's not to say that's a one-sided argument. Since Billy's return to rehab, Johnny's been very critical in all of his decision-making and how he's been acting, becoming reckless yet again in every sense of the word. Returning back to drugs, violence, and laughing at the stint in rehab where he was supposed to be reformed. Johnny's critique, or at the very least his disapproval of Billy's behavior, is justified. And in response, Billy does everything he can to undermine Johnny's influence in ways that felt very believable. He did it in plain, simple terms that explained why the Lost was also actively undoing its recent period of growth. First came Billy's bike, framed as a symbol of weakness because Johnny had submitted to the deadbeats by giving it up, stripping it of any meaning even though Johnny and Angus had built it for Billy. Next came the war with the Angels itself. After Billy attacked them, reclaimed his bike, and then killed the Angel members who showed up outside the clubhouse to question the truce, he threw it back in Johnny's face that the truce had never meant anything. He claimed he always knew they were traitors, meaning in his mind, he justified everything that he did, which are actions Johnny already told him would be the only reason he would question or stand up to Billy, because for Johnny, keeping them out of trouble and just making money was the priority, not this romantic version of biker living his mentor seems to be so desperately holding on to. And we hear this in one conversation between the two of them that highlights this clearly.
I'm the leader of the chapter again, Johnny, and you're just another brother. Can you handle it?
Long as you run the chapter right, we can all handle it.
I'll run it the way it needs to be run. Same as the three guys before me did, same as I'm doing now.
Really? Feels kind of different. Before, all we cared about was having fun, the brothers, getting shit-faced, and screw you, you get in our way, you're gonna get your teeth kicked in.
Thank you for sharing. And now what's it feel like to you, Jonathan?
Feels like knocking heads is a full-time job. And maybe if we stopped doing it for a minute, we'd look around and realize that the fun ended a long time ago.
Yeah? Well, I signed up to be a brother for life, you ungrateful fuck. If you're in the Lost for the good times only, fair weather weekends and the caraways, then you ain't in the Lost. You get me?
Chill out, man. I just hope when we decide to take a break, slow down, that it's still an option on the table.
Billy was no fool. He had his own feelings about the Angels of Death, how his chapter was being ran, and the lack of blind loyalty that he can trust he had behind him. Now, that's not to say he didn't have any loyalties from Johnny or Jim, but when you're dealing with your vice president that seems to be rather critical of you, who at one point in time had the position of chapter president and looked up to you for the majority of his life until you lost his high-ranking position, at least that might be how it was framed in his head, it's not that hard to make the connection of this judgment coming from a place of envy or even a place that can lead some genuine sway over the other members. And that is a problem. So when he had the opportunity to get rid of the two biggest roadblocks, he leaped at it.
In that case, I guess my brother is in good hands. You take care of that prick.
It seems the definition of family loyalty differs in your country.
The marketplace has a value for everything, and I guess that a disloyal Jew bastard ain't worth shit to me, brother or no brother. Such are the heady joys of consumer capitalism.
Organizing a meeting with the triads brings their role into the forefront. They were accidental bystanders in the mess Billy created. When Jason, an enforcer of the Lost, was killed in the main Grand Theft Auto 4 story by Nico under the orders of Mikhail Faustin, Billy seized the opportunity, claiming the Angels of Death were responsible. It was a bold-faced lie, but one that gave him cover to go after the $2 million worth of heroin the Angels were sitting on, which, as it turned out, actually belonged to the triads. Billy would at one point attempt to sell this heroin he stole, which becomes important later. So here's the quick explanation behind that. Johnny met with Elizabeta Torres, a well-connected cocaine distributor, to set up a deal to offload the heroin. It was actually Billy's idea to go through her, not Johnny's. Elizabeta was already under heavy police scrutiny at the time for her own operation, so the buyer turning out to be an undercover cop could have stemmed from them watching her, or really any one of them at the time, including Nico through his connection to Michelle, who turned out to be an IAA agent. Regardless, after the botched job, an FIB agent starts periodically calling Johnny's phone to taunt him and pressure him into cooperating. Johnny never gives the guy anything and just tells him to kick rocks. After this failure, and even warning Billy that potentially 2 government agencies are now keeping a closer eye on them, Billy then decided to quietly meet with the triads. He seemingly offered to let them reclaim it with no further problems, as long as they did him one small favor and killed Johnny. During this initial meeting that's a complete secret from everyone else, we see him label Johnny as disloyal. But aside from butting heads with Billy in front of the chapter, there's been no real sign of disloyalty. And if there had been, it would have been obvious for everyone to see. Billy going out of his way to set up Johnny's murder, seemingly without even telling Brian, Billy's biggest supporter, shows he knew exactly what he was doing. And calling Johnny disloyal was just a throwaway line to make himself look better in front of the triads, or to explain the depth of his narcissism. As within the rules of the Lost, Billy can't technically get rid of Johnny, even if he sees him as a traitor. So why not get an outside party to get them to do your dirty work? The irony is that Billy ends up being the one who goes down in this meeting. As gunfire erupts between Johnny, Jim, and the triads, the responding police find Billy after he somehow crashes his bike during a botched escape attempt, resulting in his prompt arrest, during which he's seen yelling and blaming Johnny for setting him up, when in fact it's the complete opposite. Yet it doesn't matter, because Brian, the perfect blind follower Billy always wanted, buys the story completely. He believes Johnny set Billy up to get arrested so he could reclaim the spot as president, the very narrative Billy had been hammering into Brian's head since returning from rehab, along with painting Johnny as a snitch. Because that same FIB agent that was calling Johnny also called Brian, and they claimed that Johnny had ratted them out. Rewatching the sequence of events and how it all unfolds, it looks like after the heroin deal went south with the police, the Lost came under even heavier surveillance, just as Johnny warned they would. The cops may have actively been targeting members they thought they could flip. Johnny made a prime candidate since he was directly involved in the deal and its fallout. Brian, well, there's an argument to be made that he's weak. As a chapter secretary, he's seen how the club runs under both Billy and Johnny's leadership, knows Billy's volatility firsthand, and has a close personal tie to him. If the timing lined up, it's possible the FIB contacted Brian, told him Johnny snitched, and Brian relayed that to Billy, who then set up the triads meeting to take Johnny out. Sounds straightforward, and in that case it was actually Johnny who technically was a traitor. But it still neglects Billy's secrecy around the meeting and the fact that if Brian really had confirmation from a phone call that Johnny was a rat, Billy could have just used the club's own politics to remove him, with open support. Since the whole ordeal more so falls under Brian being the traitor, too close to Billy to accept anything else as the truth, pushing the Alderney chapter into an all-out civil war because of his blind devotion, it's simpler to say what Michael Klebitz warned all those years ago was true, and actively playing out in real time. Billy is all about self-preservation, and sadly, Johnny will learn that the hard way.
Billy may have helped to build our club, but he sure as shit ripped it apart. I'll forgive him the insults and injuries, but I can't forgive him that. Treacherous fucking bastard. He went insane. Drugs sent that fucking sane.
Johnny would get confirmation from Thomas Stubbs, a congressman who had his own corrupt work lined up for him. He was returning a favor to Johnny by sharing Billy had turned snitch on the inside. Billy was going to testify in court and pin a drug-dealing ring on Johnny and on Angus, then disappear into witness protection while his former brothers did the time. Unlike the first betrayal, this one is clear and right in front of Johnny's face with no other distractions. Stubbs would offer some legal help should Johnny need it, but the situation calls for the impossible. Johnny, now serving as chapter president, has to call on the remnants of the lost to storm Alderney State Penitentiary and kill Billy. On the surface, it plays like pure adrenaline. The climax, the finale to the Alderney chapter, an all-out assault to silence a rat. That's all it feels like until Johnny actually comes face to face with Billy.
Well, here you are, you fork-tongued bastard! I've been looking for you!
Johnny, the Jew, come on, man! Checkmate, dude. Come on, get it over with. Do it!
I'm doing it!
What? You waiting for a speech or something? Come on!
This isn't Johnny's first kill, but it is his most important one. He stands there with a weak stance, shoulders dropped and hunched over. It appears as if his arms are shaking, hesitant to pull the trigger, only firing when Billy rushes in with the shank and forces his hand, sending Johnny stumbling backwards. We don't get much more emotional insight into this moment beyond what we see on screen in Johnny's own words afterwards. He claims drugs ruined Billy, drove him insane, and that his actions ripped the Alderney chapter apart, something Johnny can't forgive. In a way, it ties back to his line about the clubhouse being a mausoleum dedicated to bullshit, alluding to how killing Billy and watching the chapter's destruction shattered the very foundation Johnny essentially built his life on. It undermined everything he believed Billy was, a loyal childhood friend, and that harsh realization came at the cost of what the Lost Brotherhood itself stood for. It also lends weight to Billy's warped perspective. He effectively was the chapter. While he didn't found it, he helped shape and harden it into what it became by the time Johnny took over. If he couldn't run it from the top exactly as he saw fit, then in his mind the chapter had no right to exist. Anyone who offered even a little opposition, no matter how well-meaning it was, deserved whatever fallout came next. The hell he brought, the betrayal that came with it, wasn't his doing, just as the selfless noble leader and close friend Johnny at one point believed in wasn't there.